Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter. When we think of fathers in the Bible, I think most, if not all of us, immediately jump to either God the Father or Saint Joseph. These shining examples set for us, show us what fatherhood ought to look like. But what about the less than stellar fathers that has multiple examples across the scriptures? Steve Ray joins us to talk about this. Steve Ray leads pilgrimages to the Holy Land, Rome, and other sites. He's also a prolific author and apologist and speaker. Steve, my friend, thank you for joining us again. How are you? As we try to get Steve on the connection, I want to talk about some of these worst fathers in the Bible. And this really is an important area of consideration for all of us. And the reason why is this. In the person of Jesus Christ, and ultimately in Joseph and in God the Father, we get images of what fatherhood really truly entails. Unfortunately, we have fathers in the Bible that outnumber the virtuous ones. You can begin all the way with Adam. There are particular ones that Steve is going to join us to talk about. And some I want to draw to our attention right now. The first is Jephthah. This is in Judges chapter 11. Now, Jephthah was a judge. He was a military leader, a leader of Israel. But before going into battle against the Ammonites, he made a reckless transactional vow to God. If Jephthah won, he would sacrifice as a burnt offering whatever first came out of his house to meet him upon his return. Now, Steve, I'm glad you're joining us. How are you?
I'm doing very good. And why would you ask me to come on and talk about fathers? What do I know about fathers?
I was actually going to say, for you, it's more than Happy Father's Day or even Happy Grandfather's Day. It's Happy Great Grandfather's Day this weekend.
Yes, we had email yesterday from our grandson who's studying at the ITI Institute, started by John Paul II in Austria, and he said, the baby's coming any minute. That's my grandson. I'm going to be a great-grandfather, which is quite amazing. You know, in the Bible, the longevity was very short. People died of plagues and of diseases and of war. Very seldom did a father get to know his grandchildren. And that's one of the reasons why one of the great blessings was by God. He says that if you do what I say, you will see your children's children, which was very unusual in biblical times. So yes, I'm very, nothing I love more, I have to say, Marcus, than being a husband and a father and a grandfather. We had kids here today, and I just loved being with those grandkids. So I'm glad to talk to you about this today.
Well, as you willingly join us, we wanted to touch on the less than stellar fathers in the Bible. And I just began touching on Jephthah. Now, you know, Judges is a weird book, Steve. It's full of some really bizarre stories.
Weird stuff in the Bible.
So tell us about Jephthah, please.
Well, to say that I'm going to offer as a sacrifice the first thing that comes out of my front door is a pretty audacious thing to say. Frankly, I would never say that. I would never even come to my mind. But he vowed that thinking maybe the dog was going to come running out first. But, it ended up being his daughter. And but he honored God, and it was a display of his honor of God, but it's not something I would have ever even thought of doing. So, Marcus, when you called and asked me to do a show about good examples of fathers in the Bible, I sat with my wife and I said, okay, let's think through who are the really good fathers. And I started and I said, you know what? I can't think of any because even every father I think of had huge problems, which is in a way good for us because even though we want to be good fathers, there's going to be things we do wrong. For example, she said Noah. And I said, well, no, Noah came out of the ark and he went in and got drunk and laid naked in his tent and caused a big scandal, which even caused the curse of one of his sons. Well, then I said, well, what about Abraham? Well, Abraham was a good father too, but he was going to offer his son as a sacrifice, a burnt offering. Now, of course, that was in obedience to God. And in my book on Genesis, I show how Isaac even cooperated. But still, that's not perspective of a father willing to burn his son on the stake. I don't always consider that as being the great example of a father. So I kept thinking through all of these. I found Job, which was probably a good example of a father. And of course, Joseph. But I have one thing. I may get reproved for this, Marcus, but even Joseph left his son behind in Jerusalem for a day while he was traveling. He forgot to check off on his checklist for travel. Let's see, suitcase, underwear, son. And he walked. And I've always struggled with that. How in the world could they have left their son behind for a day? But I have come up with some reasons why. But you're right. In the Bible, there are a lot of issues. Fathers, even the great ones, had problems. And that, to me, is an encouragement, because I want to be a great father, but I know that I haven't done everything right. And I've often had to ask my children to forgive me, which is something very hard for a father to do, but it's something we should be quick to ask our children when we have proved to be wrong.
And thereby, what you're also trying to share with us is that God knows that He is the perfect Father, and that our fatherhood will always pale in comparison.
Yep, and that's true. So there's a lot of examples in the Old Testament and the New about bad fathers. But I have always told people, and whenever somebody, in fact, it was just the other day, I met a newly married couple that they said they were hoping to have a child soon. And I said, always pull them aside, and I said, I'm an old man. I'm 72. I have 21 grandchildren and a great-grandchild coming, and I want to give you a bit of advice. I looked the guy right in the eye, and I point to him. I said, you want to know what's the best thing you can do to be a father? The very most important thing you can do is to love their mother. Mm-hmm. And people say, well, what about loving God? I said, that's taken for granted. That's part of our basic nature. We have to love the God and the church and so on. But in regards to your children, there's really nothing more important you can do for your children than to love and defend their mother. And I made up my mind to do that at the very beginning. I never let my children yell at their mother. They could never say no to her. They could never defy her in any way. They had me to deal with, and I was very consistent about that. And you know, Marcus, to this day, my children, 4 children, and even our grandchildren adore their mother. Every one of our kids call my wife and talk to her at least for an hour every week. Mm. And the grandkids love to come and be with grandma. But I set the standard right from the beginning. That's the father's job, is to be the head of the home, to wear the pants, to not make other things more important. The most important thing for a father is his wife and his family. Of course, God. I'm assuming that, okay? I don't need people to say, but it's God. No, yes, of course it's God. But what does God want us to do? To love our wives and to love our kids and to be models for them. The most important thing you can ask a kid to find out something about their father is to ask a child, what is the most important thing in the world to your dad? What's that child going to say? Oh, my dad loves to golf. Oh, my dad's going to make $1 million. He works every day, and he's gone all the time making money. If you ask a child, what's the most important thing in the world to your father, you'll get a very good idea, dads, where you stand.
Yeah. Oh, that's so true. And in fact, I encourage all of the fathers listening right now to go home and ask your child that. If I ask you what's the most important thing to Daddy, what will you say it is? And so, Steve, actually, you raised 2 really good questions. We're running out of time. Steve, thank you so much for joining us to share this wisdom.
Sure.
My guest has been Steve Ray. He is a lot of things, but primarily Son of God, husband, father, grandfather, and most recently, great-grandfather. And given that this Sunday is the celebration of Father's Day, I want to encourage all of you fathers to understand, as Steve was rightly mentioning, the scriptures tell us we will fail. But that's a good source of hope, that God's fatherhood will never fail us, and we can rise up because He gives us the grace to. Let's make Jesus and then our spouses the most important things in our lives in that order. Stay tuned. I'm Marcus Peter.